And on this episode of Stuff That Matters, we were joined by an absolute force. April Simpkins is a New York Times best-selling author, an international speaker, podcast host, workplace strategist, and a mental health advocate. April is the host of As I Was Saying, a podcast where workplace mental health finally gets the mic. For more than 30 years, April's been the go-to strategist behind the scenes, helping organizations build better workplaces from culture to compliance to courageous conversations. Before launching her podcast and stepping fully into advocacy, she ran an HR consulting firm that served over 1,000 businesses across 15 industries. April advised CEOs, mentored young professionals, and developed HR strategies that didn't just check boxes, but they truly transformed organizations. Her story, however, is more than just business. It's deeply personal. After losing her daughter, Cheslie, to suicide in 2022, April became a louder, more relentless voice in the fight for mental wellness. Through the help of her daughter's story, Cheslie and April co-authored a New York Times bestseller, By the Time You Read This. April went on to found the Cheslie C. Christ Foundation to honor her light and advocate for others navigating mental health challenges. April speaks globally on leadership, mental health, and workplace strategies, and she has shared stages with Harvard, Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, Johns Hopkins Medicine, Michael J. Fox Foundation, Coca-Cola, Citadel, and more. She's also served on several boards, including NAMI Piedmont Tri-County, Duke Energy's South Carolina Advisory Board, and the South Carolina Small Business Development Centers. When she's not writing, speaking, or recording her own podcast, she's doing plenty of media appearances, including podcast appearances like ours. You can find her running a trail, playing the piano, laughing with family, or building the kind of workplace that she wished more people had. Now please enjoy this powerful interview with April Simpkins. And thank you all so much for tuning into another episode of Stuff That Matters. A very special episode today, as our guest has been one that we have been eyeing and trying to get on, I would say, for the better part of a year, maybe more, but she's a very busy woman, and that is April Simpkins. She is a mental health advocate, a New York Times bestselling author, international speaker, podcast host, among many other things. April, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm truly excited to be here. Thank you.
So, April, again, it's an honor, and I know we've gotten to speak several times outside of a podcast world, and again, we just have so much respect. I think we talked last Friday, and Patrick and I texted. We said, "Holy moly, she is a force," And I think you've probably been a force all your life, and right now that force seems to be aimed at improving the lives and mental health of a lot of people across the country. So we're just really excited to kind of get to know you a little bit more and get to know your story. So I've read your book probably about a year ago when you first did a speaking engagement, I think, in Rock Hill.
Yes.
And that's kind of when I first got on my radar, and then reread it in preparation for this. Again, it is a fascinating and devastating and affirming. I mean, it's an incredible book. We encourage everybody to read it. It feels like a lot of people already have. But at what point did you know that you needed to finish Cheslie's story? And can you walk us through just that process of, again, becoming an author and becoming an author of this specific story?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. I knew Cheslie was writing a book. She started writing it in 2021. And as a matter of fact, she had a publisher and she was trying to make her deadlines. And so towards the end of 2021, she calls me up and she says, Mom, I need to hit my deadline. I'm going to do a little bit of a workcation in Turks and Caicos. And she didn't even finish the question of, would you like to join me? And I was already looking up flights. I'm like, okay, yeah. I'm there.
Yeah.
And I remember being there in Turks and Caicos, and she was working on that book, and we'd be, on the beach, and I'd be out there like a 5-year-old building sandcastles, and she'd be, kind of typing away. So I knew that she was writing this piece of work. Cheslie passed in January of 2022, not long after she had finished that manuscript, but before she had finalized her contract with this top 5 publishing house. And the publishing house declined to publish the book. And I understood why, although I was somewhat devastated, because her book ended on this kind of positive note. All the world is kind of a pageant. We're all kind of performing on some level. And the book didn't explain how we got here to a world where she wasn't in it.
Right.
And I talked to a number of book agents and people who were, trying to help me find someone who was willing to take on publishing this book. I don't often share this part of the story, but just as I was tiring of hearing the no's, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to find a little self-publisher and I'll just put it out there. I got connected with the original editor from Cheslie's book, the person who had sat with Cheslie and had helped her move through her writings, and we connected. And she was the one who, after talking to some agents, said, you're going to have to finish the book. You're going to have to help us understand how we got from this incredible woman so accomplished to a world where she isn't there. And that is when I made the decision, me, not a writer, but loving my daughter enough to say, I'm going to do this. My daughter shared a final note with me before she passed. She sent it to me the morning that she died. And inside of that note was her final wishes. She just had 4. And one of them was to see to it that this book was published. So it became this marching order for me as a mom, to fulfill every one of my daughter's final wishes, whatever it took.
Sure.
And that is how we got to the place where I talked to the publisher at Forefront, and he believed in this book. And he, like me, after reading the manuscript, felt like it was going to save lives. And that's why we needed to get this book out there. And we fast-tracked it and got that book out there.
Wow. So yeah, her book. So basically, for folks who, and I think we know your story. We're going to ask a lot of questions to make sure if folks haven't heard your story or her story that they get to. So that was basically her part of that book, which is probably 3/4 of
Right.
by the time you read it. That was her basically completed manuscript. And was the original vision for that just the life and times of this awesome Miss USA and the behind the scenes? Because there's a lot of interest. I mean, it's super, super interesting, but that part of the book is clearly not a deep dive into mental health or anything like that, really. I mean, you kind of get a couple pieces, but it really is more. So what was the vision for that? What was Cheslie trying to convey in her story?
She originally wrote this book to talk about this historic moment in pageantry and in pageant history in this country, where you had 4 incredible women. And I think when she was writing this, it was the trifecta.
Yes.
4
Okay.
incredible women, all who were Black, who held these major titles in pageantry. And so that is why so much of the book kind of centers around that part of her life. And she's also pulled in the fact that when she was Miss USA, she was also a practicing attorney and also became an extra TV news correspondent. She was Emmy nominated for that. So she was managing all 3 of these iconic positions at the same time. So this book was her kind of talking about what got her there. But when you read that book and she's talking about her struggles and battles with imposter syndrome, what she sees when she looks in the mirror, how she doesn't feel worthy, these moments when someone would say something like that professor in law school and it just sticks with her and devastates her. It was clear that she was giving people a behind the curtain look at what goes on in the mind of someone who is battling with a mental illness. For her, that was persistent depressive disorder or dysthymia.
So April, staying along that theme for a little bit, in the book, there's some discussion around pressure that Cheslie was feeling, despite her success. When you wrote the book and you continued this story, what were some of the takeaways you hoped readers would have, or readers would have, around the hidden struggles of high achieving individuals? It's clear Cheslie was, her success was to the moon and back. what were you thinking along those lines in terms of the struggles of folks who have great achievements?
I love that question. Um, I honestly, when I wrote my portion of the book, my goal wasn't really to talk to those people specifically, although I figured they would find themselves in that book because many of them have reached out and said, "This is me."
Right.
Um, my hope was if they identified themselves as high achievers who were struggling with their mental health, that they would know to seek help, that you are not alone, you are not different, you are not, you should not isolate, but there is support out there. And that's why there are, so many resources listed in the back of that book. When I wrote my portion of the book and, acknowledged that my daughter was a high achiever, and many times I would try to tell her to slow down, and that fell on deaf ears,
Right.
because she had her own pace and she was going to move at that pace. My hope was in sharing my grief and feeling like, at that point, I'm talking to the people who were left behind when someone leaves us the way Cheslie left us, that they would find nuggets of wisdom that I shared around grief, that there are questions that will remain unanswered, and you learn how to live with that unanswered question.
April, I think it goes without saying that you learned quite a bit about Cheslie, certainly in the immediate aftermath of her passing, but then obviously writing the book as well. And I'd imagine it's safe to say you learned quite a bit about yourself during this process. Can you speak a little bit about that, some of what you learned, and then also the connection you had with Cheslie even after she passed? Did it change at all? Did you feel bonded even more just understanding her in a way that maybe you didn't prior?
I love that question. Let me start with that piece of it. I learned a lot about Cheslie after she passed, and that was primarily because every single thing she owned eventually landed here in my house, and I had to sort through it. And when we cleaned out her apartment in New York, I would not allow anyone to throw away so much as a Post-it note. Like every single thing in that apartment, every pen, note, whiteboard was coming back to my house eventually. And that included her journals, her notebooks. It included her Bible with notations on the side, books that she read, her cell phone, text messages. So in absorbing all of that, I learned so much more about my daughter that went beyond the things that she and I talked about. I learned the things that she talked to herself about, and that became very, very eye-opening. It was a process trying to figure out how much of myself I would put in that book. And again, I was not a writer before this book. And so the book is split into two parts, Cheslie's story and April's story. And you'll notice when my story starts, it is date stamped. And that is because I didn't know where to start. So I literally went back to my own journals where I had kind of written down what was going on. And that is where the stamps come from. And so from that, I kind of curated what I would share and then address some of the broader questions that people had. I am still often asked, what signs did I see? And, I go back to the book and that there was a first attempt many years before Cheslie passed. So there is this difference for me in what I was dealing with when I was in that hospital with my daughter versus how I was managing my own emotion and feelings after she passed. I had a long period of time when I knew how and learned how to support her versus when I was in that hospital when she was in law school, thinking, where did this even come from? How am I here with Cheslie? I'm the mom of 6 children. And when Cheslie left for undergrad, I thought, whoo, well, there's one who I don't have to worry about. She's doing great. And it taught me a lesson about how to keep eyes on my children, how to listen to my children and not make these assumptions that these standard markers of success means they're doing just fine. Those are
Right.
the things that I learned.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think the term smiling depression, I think is kind of
Yes.
woven in there. And I think it seemed like the response from the world who didn't know Cheslie but thought they did because they saw her and she might have been a part of their lives on TV or social media or what have you. There was just a collective shock from that, right? Because we see these are the people we all aspire to be, and we tell ourselves that, okay, if I have enough, if I have that life, if I have that fame, if I have whatever, it's going to fill whatever void is there, And I think Cheslie's story for me just reminds me of just the just awesome, and I don't mean awesome as in good, I mean awesome as like awe-inducing power of chronic pain, and just that it does not discriminate, and it is not easily filled, and fame and money and success don't always fill it. Again, I think they can sometimes be temporary. They're nice things, they can give you but I think you had mentioned even she had these incredible moments of joy, but they felt fleeting, and she kind of kept coming back to this baseline of feeling in pain. So, I mean, what would have been some of your, what do you think some folks out there get wrong still about depression, mental illness, and even suicide? What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that if you could just burst some bubbles of misunderstanding, what would you want to say?
I almost feel like I should have written that question down because there's so many things that I want to add and say. Many times, so many people will say things like, I wish I could have talked to your daughter. I wish I could have talked to Cheslie. And I immediately know when that's the initial response that there is a lack of understanding of how her mental health was impacted. Not once, and I say that emphatically, not once did a person say, I wish I could have sat down and listened to her. And so the first bubble that I want to burst is if you don't know how to listen to someone, then you are missing the mark. Then there's a lot that's going right past you. If you are walking around assuming you are all knowing and have all the answers, and if someone could just hear your nugget of wisdom, it's going to change everything, you've missed the mark. You have to learn how to listen. And sometimes that listening feels uncomfortable because the second piece of wisdom, it's not your job to come in and try to fix something. Cheslie was not broken. She was battling a chronic mental illness. She was not broken. She didn't need to be fixed. She needed people who knew how to sit with her in those moments of pain and be there with her. I often share this when I'm talking to audiences, the difference between being a savior and a supporter. And, if you've read the book, I talk about that very phrase in the book. And I share this, if you have a very dear friend and you see them walking on a journey in front of your house in the pouring rain, no umbrella, just walking, and you see them and you're on your dry porch with the light on, the first thing you do is call to them to tell them to come to your dry porch so they can be dry too. That is being a savior. To be a supporter is to see your friend and go get your umbrella and go out there and walk beside them with your umbrella so they are not alone in that part of their journey. And it is so hard for us to capture that piece that you've got to go sit with them in that pain and not try to call them up to your dry porch, which does not help them move through their journey. And the number of people who will talk to me as if they were the savior that Cheslie needed also lets me know that they don't understand and we need a lot more education.
Yeah, it's got to be deeply frustrating and
Yes.
offensive, I would say, too.
Yes.
Again, the presumption of that kind of a question. And I think the way you even said it there is like, yeah, that if the talking instead of listening, like that, that one more lecture about how you need to do X, Y, and Z is gonna.
Absolutely.
I draw that right to our space. We work with adolescents, right, in our mental health treatment facility, and we have some community-based services. And I've done direct care, started out doing direct care, and fortunately, I learned that lesson very early on in my career working with kids was the listening component to working with that population. It didn't matter what I knew. They didn't care about my degree. What they cared is if I just sat down and listened and kind of your analogy of the porch and the umbrella. I worked in a program where we lived with the kids 24. We were there on that journey with them. And so very powerful words. I love the analogy and I love the emphasis on the ability to listen. So thank you for sharing that. No question. I just got to say that.
Yeah.
It makes such a huge difference when you approach someone with listening ears, as opposed to, again, this belief that you have all the answers. I liken that unto someone seeing a house on fire and running up with their bottle of water, like that's going to change it will quench your thirst, but it's not going to put out that flaming fire. There's more that is needed in that moment. And so when I hear people say things like, I wish I could have talked to her, blah, 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 and I'm like, we're past that.
Right.
What I do think people who haven't experienced it, because everybody's experienced a bad day and everybody's experienced a bad week and a bad season.
Right.
But that is so different than what we're talking about. Like the cloud of chronic depression is just it's a different world. So I do think there's, again, I appreciate, I think there can be good faith people who try to say, hey, listen, the human experience, there are a lot of universal things about the human experience. But what was happening probably in Cheslie's head on a day-to-day basis and her heart was a different story. This was not a bad day or a fleeting moment or a bad breakup. This was not situational. This was not circumstantial. This was chronic.
Thank you for saying that. I was talking with someone yesterday and having much of the same conversation around Cheslie's battle. And then, after Cheslie passed, you are right. Many people saw her as Miss USA smiling and waving, and they saw her as the extra TV news correspondent, giggling and talking to celebrities and people of noteworthy importance. And that was it. They saw her in those brief moments. And so when Cheslie died, the number of people who started with these conspiracy theories, who dove into her social media and every single thing, trying to write a narrative that just did not exist. And, I learned a valuable lesson myself when someone is going through something difficult for them and they say, please respect our family's privacy at this time. It hits very differently for me now because we just did not have that. There were people just writing books and everything, trying to make sense of this. And that was the reason why my husband and I stepped out into view when we sat and did Red Table Talk. And that was the first time we shared that there was a note and a first attempt. And when Jada asked me why did I want to come on that show, this was just weeks after Cheslie passed when we filmed. And I told her I needed the conspiracy theories to stop. My family needs time to grieve and heal. And we cannot do that while this is going on. At the time, I had a son who was 13 as
Right.
a 12-year-old, and they have to go to school and see all of this and hear all of this. And I'm like, my family needs space.
Yeah.
And I really thought after I did that, that's where it was going to end, that people would go, oh my goodness, this is a whole family. It needs to stop here. Um, and nothing could be further from the truth. I'll tell you what happened as a result of going on that program. Every social media account I have, my phone, my business phone, was flooded with people who were saying, I'm struggling just like your daughter. That's my life too. I don't know what to do. My child is suffering. I see that in my child. I'm a high achiever. People don't understand. It was in the tens of thousands.
Mm.
And that's when I realized um, my calling is to be an advocate. All of these tens of thousands of people need to be heard. We have got to reduce this stigma to the point that people are not hiding and afraid and whispering under their breath that they're battling and suffering. I was having this conversation yesterday with my husband, and I said, there was a time in this country decades ago when you could not say the word breast in public. Like, people would mumble it, but thank you to the family and loved ones of Susan G. Komen, who not only made it okay to say that word breast and cancer, but
Mm-hmm.
through education and open conversation, we all learned so much about breast cancer. There's stages, there's treatments, there's now genes that you can find out, and preventive care is, there's no longer this stigma attached with saying, I've been diagnosed, or my wife was diagnosed, my daughter, my husband was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Mm.
My wish before the end of my own life is that Cheslie story will be the Susan G. Komen of stigma removal of mental health battles. And if I have to continue to share her story and talk about this book and write more and have conversations like these so that people know, okay, I'm not alone in this, but what do we do? Well, we open up these conversations. We lean into experts like you. We listen to what you share so that we can begin to destigmatize something that should really carry no stigma in the first place.
Right.
That's a beautiful vision and a beautiful dream, and we're all on board. Whatever we can do to help in that, we are all in. And I tell people all the time, New Hope is one provider in this massive world that we live in. We're one, and we're small, but we have the heart to do this work, and we want to do good work with kids and families. We get thousands of phone calls every year, and the families on the other side of the individual on the other side of that call, they don't even know where to start. They have no idea where to start looking for assistance. And they just they just do a random Google, and we get calls for adult services, and we don't provide adult services, and it's so random. And I've been in meetings and conferences where if you have a medical or physical health issue, people just they know what to do right then and there.
Yes.
When it comes to something with mental health, it's we don't know what to do. And I'll stop talking, and I'm sure I'll get a question on this. There are times when just because of the work I do, I meet people at our community pool, at my kid's game or something, like, what do you do? And I tell them what we do, and their eyes open, wide open. They're like, oh, wow, that's so interesting. You're the first person I know who's worked in this field. And it's like they're learning something for the first time. I didn't even know that a program like that existed. So your work in this space and advocating and educating is so vitally important. We can't thank you, obviously, enough for telling the story and continuing to do so. When you're out doing your speaking and doing what you're doing today, is there like a do you have one bit of advice? Is there one nugget of advice that you offer to families who reach out to you with, an individual in their family that's struggling secretly? Is there one thing that you go to? Is there a list of 10? How do you approach that?
That's a big question. So
I'm sorry.
that's okay. So there are things that I say to individuals, and then there are things that I, say to families. Um, what I often say to individuals is sometimes truly your family won't understand, not your physical family,
Right.
but it is important to find your community, find your tribe. And those are the people who will understand, and lean into them. And I, often share many different places where you can find your group, your support group, or those who are going to be there who will understand when you step into that room. For families, everyone who is having a mental health struggle is not necessarily battling a mental illness. And I really think for parents, sometimes when their child is struggling, their mental health is taxed, many of them almost hear, my child might have a mental illness. That can't be,
Right.
because here's all of the things we do. We're a great family. We provide lots of love. Can't be that. Um, I wholeheartedly believe that as families, you've got to educate yourself. You have to learn. And I say this all the time. I know I talk a lot about NAMI because I'm a national ambassador for NAMI, but any place that is able to provide you with resources, especially those resources that are local,
Yeah.
find that. Remove the denial and stop thinking this is something I did. And a number of people, which almost shocked me on some levels after Cheslie passed, a number of people who were quick to point to me and say, you claim you were Cheslie's best friend. How did you not know this? Or why didn't you see that if you were so close? Because I really believe people need someplace to throw that blame.
Right.
And if you are a family with a child who is struggling, for so many parents, you want to deny that you were a bad parent without realizing this may have nothing to do with how you parented, but your child needs help and support. And that's really where the listening comes into play, and
Right.
the realization that you can't fix everything.
Right.
I often share this and laugh and joke about this, how, in another life, I was probably a mathematician or an engineer because I love numbers. I loved numbers since I was a little kid, which was why I was an accounting major when I went to college. But I remember vividly in early grade school when I would do the math equations, and they always worked out. Like
Mm.
10 was always divided by 5, which equals 2. And, 9 divided by 3 was always 3. But the first time I had a division problem where there was a remainder, I was blown away. How can this not work out perfectly? Why is there something left over? And what do I do with the point something that's left over? Like, my brain almost couldn't process that it wasn't going to make sense, that I couldn't fix this. It was just something that was going to hang out there. And I think
Mm.
we bring that into life so many times. We're trying to get a perfect equation when there isn't one. And parents listen to their children and they're waiting for the equation to be perfect so they can come up with the answer that makes sense. And sometimes there's just a remainder.
Right.
I often
Right.
say to parents, you don't have to have all of the answers. And I say this also to employers, because many times when I am talking on stages, I'm talking about mental health in the workplace. But I say this, you don't have to have all the answers, but it is your job to know where the resources are.
Right.
Get your child to the resources, get your friend, talk to them. I have on many occasions dialed 988 for someone and handed them my phone. That's a resource. That's me providing a resource and not trying to have all the answers. And so
Mm.
I can't emphasize enough for parents, your child, one of the best things you can do for your child, in addition to having an annual physical, is to also take them to see a psychiatrist or a professional who can talk to them and understand maybe some things that you may not see or understand. Have both. Talk about both. Let your children know there's a balance here, your mental and your physical. Let's make
Right.
sure both are doing okay. And if not, what can we do to support you?
oppositional, defiant, documented repeatedly.
Failure to progress, violent tendencies. Let go! Not safe for community placement. Eyes up, Isaiah.
They don't know me, but they think they do.
I'm so sorry.
I can't help it. I piss people off. Then it's oppositional, defiant. Maybe I am. Or maybe I just don't know how to feel safe.
April, I'm curious, how do you, and you mentioned even before we jumped on that, this morning was tough and your husband was awesome. The mornings can be tough. And so you're out there. Obviously you have made some meaning of this by going out and impacting thousands of lives for the positive, which, sometimes, again, there's not always great answers for things, but we have to make meaning. We have to move forward. How do you balance, having to continuously tell your story, Cheslie's story, while also continuing to heal? This was not 20 years ago. This was 3 years ago. And how do you still protect your privacy and Cheslie's siblings and your kids? And like, how are you balancing all of that? And just be curious.
I love that. One of the things that I did for myself, and I share this many times when I'm talking to others, is don't lie to yourself. If you're not okay, don't lie to yourself. Don't try to pretend to yourself, because it just creates something that's incongruent, in your head. And I would harp around that question, how are you? When people would say, how are you? And it's almost a reflex for people to come back with, I'm fine, I'm doing okay, blah,
Right.
blah, blah, even if they're not. And so one of the things that I did for myself and keeping myself true to myself, and of course, my love of numbers, is I made this little Excel spreadsheet. Don't laugh, but I made this little Excel spreadsheet, and I added the numbers 1 through 5, with 5 being life is wonderful right now. I'm in a good place. And 1 being I'm spiraling, which I described spiraling as the mixture of intense grief and intense depression. Is not a good place. And so, I have 1 through 5 numerically, and then I've assigned a feeling word to each of those. 5 is great. Like I said, 1 is spiraling. And then I have an action, something that I know I need to do if I'm in that place. And I've shared that with people who are closest to me. And, when I'm at a 5 and I'm feeling great, my action is to text 3 people and let them know I appreciate them.
Oh, love it.
And the benefit of that is that, people don't only hear from me if I'm not okay. They're hearing great things. I'm feeding back into them when it's there for me and it's abundant. And when I'm at 1, there are 2 people that I reach out to, and that is my husband and my best friend. And they understand, again, it's not about trying to fix me. It's just meeting me with what I need when I'm in a very bad place, and they don't try to push me. And 2s aren't great, but I can still maneuver through a 2. And, earlier I was having a rough morning. I would put it at a 2.5, and was not getting out of bed, did not want the light on. And then my husband appeared at the door of our bedroom with this tray and had brought my food to me, because he knows I need to eat and stay nourished. And that's something that I do for me, and I share with other people. And this is why I say that. When someone says to me, even in passing, April, how are you? I always thank them for that question. And I use that as a charge and reminder to do my own self-assessment and take an action based on where I am. So when someone says, April, how are you? And I go, oh my gosh, I'm great. I instantly know I'm going to text 3 people and let them know I appreciate them. It's not about that person asking the question. I don't put the responsibility of bringing me from a 2 to a 4 on that person. I have steps that I know and actions I know I need to take to help support me in that place where I am. So when I'm sharing this sometimes on stages with business people, because they're the worst in the office, I don't care how you feel. People do not want to share what's really going on. They feel like it's private, or someone doesn't really want to know or doesn't need to know.
Sure.
I tell them to liken that question, how are you, to seeing a speed limit sign on the highway. I don't care how fast I'm driving. The minute I see the speed limit sign, I instantaneously look at my odometer or speedometer to see how fast I'm going. It's almost instant. And I use that sign as a quick check on me. And so I tell people, when someone says, how are you? Let that be your accountability check. That's them telling you to check on you. How are you? And what action do you need to take to support you where you are?
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
I do it all the time.
Well, I love that, again, because like you said, that's become so common that it almost just feels like an opening salvo of a conversation. Nobody even puts any thought into it at all. And, but for that to actually be a trigger to be like, yeah, okay, well, let me go and
Right.
how am I actually doing? Because so much of us, and whether you're a high achiever or not, it's just easy to kind of get into autopilot mode.
Yep.
I think in life, and I think one of the things that our brains are good at, all human brains, are trying to kind of protect yourself from pain. I think typically is what the brain is trying to do, is avoid pain, but it can do that in some really bad, unhelpful, unhealthy ways, and they can become so instinctual that you actually do have to stop and slow down. So I think there's some great advice there.
Shifting gears a little bit, before the podcast, the book, and your mental health advocacy, you ran an HR consulting firm. So I'm curious, that business mindset, those skill sets from all that experience, was there any correlation or translation, when you wrote the book, when you launched your podcast, the mental health advocacy work now, were those skill sets transitioned over? How did it help you in the work you're doing today?
Oh, 100%. When I had my HR consulting practice, which I loved, I had it for 17 years before I sold it. We worked specifically with small businesses that could not afford to have an expert on their team, didn't have the workload, but needed the help. And so there were many times I was sitting in the room with a business owner, listening to them talk about what's going on in their business. And I couldn't just approach them with a cookie cutter response. It wasn't as easy as just saying, hey, your senior sales director is a bad actor, we'll fire him. Well, that's easy for me to say, but they can't really do that in the real world. And so I would have to really listen, understand the bigger picture, and provide a workable solution that made sense to them. And that ability to really sit and listen, to take in information, walk in like I know nothing, and listen has helped me tremendously as a mental health advocate. What's interesting is I always correct people, not in this setting because you guys all understand that, but I always tell people I'm an advocate. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I have one. I have a counselor and she's great. But, my whole push is, again, to be able to have these conversations. And if that means me stepping forward and sharing my story first, I'm willing to do that. And one of the things that made me an effective consultant is I was not just an HR professional. I was the owner of the consulting firm. So when I sat with a business owner, we were talking peer to peer. When I said, oh, I totally get that, I meant I totally get that. And so when I'm talking to parents or someone is listening to me share about how challenging it was to lose my daughter, while I have 5 children who are grieving and need their mom, but I'm a broken mess because I just lost my daughter. And my husband and I are both crying together. How do you get up and get the kids out to school the next day? Like all of that, because I experienced all of that, when I'm listening to moms or siblings share their pain, I understand exactly what that feels like. And so I think that is where that, the expertise of being a strategist has helped me as an advocate. I understood the importance of listening before I became an advocate.
April, before you had touched on NAMI, and obviously we all know what that is, and we all work with them. But a lot of folks who might hear this might have no, even though it's huge, they might have no idea what is that, or they've heard it in passing. Could we spend a couple minutes on, what is NAMI? Why does it matter? Again, why did you pick that as maybe the organization for you to really elevate, and how do people get plugged in if they want to get plugged in? Let's just spend a few minutes there, because I do think it's a phenomenal organization. Yes. And I still think not as many people know about it as they should. So
yes. So interesting story. I mentioned that, there were all these people, tens of thousands of people who were reaching out to me. I had really just lost my daughter, and I'm trying to get my own feet underneath me. And I felt awful sometimes leaving these people, kind of hanging on red on my social media platforms. And I was sitting in the green room. I remember I'd just done CBS Mornings. Let me give you a little sidebar here. Gayle King from CBS Mornings was Cheslie's mentor. They had a very close relationship. And Nate Burleson was Cheslie's coworker. And so when I am with Gayle and Nate, I feel like I'm with family. But I'd done CBS Mornings, and I was sitting in the green room, and I was talking to the psychiatrist they had on the air, Dr. Sue Varma. And I'm telling her this very thing that I'd shared with you. All these people are reaching out to me. I don't know what to do. They're asking for help. I don't know where to go. She said, have you ever heard of NAMI? No, I'm not familiar. So she pulls it up on her phone, and she began to talk to me about it. And my type A was like, okay, let me look into this. And the more I investigated, the more I thought this is an incredible organization. And so I reached out to a friend of a friend, who then put me in touch with Dan Gillison, who was the CEO. And the next thing I know, I'm on a Zoom call with Dan, learning more about the organization, how it is a grassroots effort that was started back in the late 70s with two women who had a child who was struggling, children who were struggling with their mental health. And there wasn't a lot of resources out there. And something about the founding of that and all the work they're doing and the passion behind it, I wanted to align myself with NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. They have a national organization that puts out so much great information and resources. But one of the things that I love about NAMI is they have more than 600 affiliates across the country, on a state level and then in communities. And the reason I found that to be so important is because the people who are reaching out to me from all over the world, but all over the US. And so for me to talk about something that might have been very local would not help someone in Southern California.
Right.
And so I love that it's very easy to find the NAMI affiliate in your area. Go to NAMI.org, plug in your zip code, and you will learn what's close to you. I considered NAMI to be the boots on the ground. They have support groups, and for people who want to sit in the room with someone, it's great. If you want to get on the Zoom with someone, it's there as well. The education, the fact that it's peer-to-peer, so right. The person talking is someone who understands through lived experience what is going on. I love that if NAMI isn't able to provide support because they are boots on the ground, they can connect you with those local resources that can help you, or at least get you started on the path to get those answers.
Right.
And so that is something I love. They're not trying to be all things to all people, but they provide those resources very well.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I mean, that kind of what Mike talked about, a lot of the work we do, we represent some of the highest levels of behavioral health care in the system, but there are dozens of levels. There are hundreds of specialists. There's psychiatrists, there's psychologists, there's trauma therapists, there's a million different models. And again, and I still believe at the end of the day, a lot of this is more of an art than a science.
Yes.
And it's more about relationships than some model found in a book, right? So, but NAMI is, I think if we could make it so that everybody in this country knows that NAMI is a good place to start. And if you need level 10 or level 2, start with NAMI, and you'll probably find one close to you, to your point.
Right.
That is a really good national kind of rallying resource, because every state is different. The South Carolina landscape versus the California landscape in mental health might as well be different universes.
Yes.
But there are NAMIs that know those universes and can help
Yes.
people navigate them. And so
100%.
I love that you have hitched, that those two things have collided, because I think that's going to be a huge net positive if NAMI can continue to grow in its reach, and people just instinctively know that's where I start. I had a friend who had a mental health issue. I'm going to tell, not like, if that just becomes the thing,
Absolutely.
that'd be great. That'd be great.
Absolutely. And so, oftentimes when I'm talking to audiences, and I always share resources, and many times I'll share national resources because I'm all over speaking nationally and sometimes internationally. But, of course, I've always got NAMI at the top, but then I always also talk about 988, and I do have a partnership with 988, just like I have an ambassadorship with NAMI. And again, many times I share with people openly that I have a therapist. My husband has one. Like, we believe that is an essential part of your well-being care. Have that therapist, just like you have a general practitioner. But so many times I share with people that, you have NAMI, you have 988, and I can always reach out to my therapist to schedule an appointment. But if you're in that crisis, whatever that crisis is, and you need to talk to someone right now, 24/7, 988 is also available. And, while they are the crisis and suicide hotline or lifeline, talking to them about a crisis going on in your life, that's what they're there for. I love that they shared that there are people who call who are going through a bad breakup. That's devastating sometimes. And, there are times when your friends don't want to hear it because they told you should have broken up with that guy 3 months ago, and thank goodness. But you are still hurting and lost, and you need someone to talk to, just to listen to you for that moment. Or, you don't know if you're walking into a termination meeting tomorrow when the boss said, I need to see you at 9 o'clock, and you need to talk to someone. And you're afraid to talk to your spouse because you don't want to get them scared and worried that the bottom's about to fall out. It is there for that. So again, this support, these organizations, I talk about, SAMHSA, SAM, HSA, I talk about many different ones that are available. I love that in the book, Dan Gillison wrote the afterword in the book, and NAMI was kind enough to provide an exhaustive list of resources in all forms, organizations, books, podcasts, just however you receive information, it's there. And that list that was provided, again, came from NAMI, who kind of got there to the ground.
Yeah, and I usually say, and this, I know that there's still a lot of resource deserts in the country, in areas where there's just not enough mental health resources, but there are a lot of mental health resources, more than people might think. I think it's an access issue and an awareness issue, sometimes even more than it is actually a resource issue. Like in Charlotte, there are 5,000 therapists in Charlotte. I can throw a football and hit a therapist. But can people access those? Can they work through the stigma? Can they work through the process? Do they know where to start?
Yep.
I think those are sometimes even more important questions than everybody thinks we need more resources. I think we need to utilize and maximize a lot of the resources we have.
100%. And something else I often share, especially when I'm standing on the stage talking to employers, it's great that you have the EAP, and many times employee assistance programs come with some counseling involved, there's many free sessions. But I share my own personal story in that I am a Black female, and I specifically want a counselor who is a Black female, because there are some things that I experience in life that factor into how I respond and how my mental health will be impacted. And, statistically, I think it's 80% or so counselors and therapists are white. And
Sure.
so if you have a diverse population, older, younger, LGBTQIA, married, unmarried, sometimes people want to connect with a counselor who has same lived experience. And, I challenge many times our HR professionals, when you are providing these resources, to also add in resources for diverse communities. And that's something else that is in that list of resources from NAMI. But it's one of the reasons why sometimes I'll mention organizations like Psychology Today or Road to Recovery, because they will align with diverse
Right.
counseling groups.
You can actually kind of filter by fit and by preference. And yep, absolutely.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. Finding a good therapist, it sometimes does feel like speed dating. And finding the one that works for you may feel that way, but I tell people, don't give up. Even if you had one bad experience, don't give up. It is so important to have that in your life.
I love the fact that this conversation turned into connecting, and I'll do a self brag about my little department. There's 5, 6 of us on my team, and we used to be known as the referral and admissions team, right? Well, a couple of years ago, we said, well, we do more than that. We're connecting people to resources, whether New Hopes or others, when it's better fit. So we changed our name to the Connections and Communications Department. We spend all day, every day connecting people. So thank you for dovetailing it to there. And we do give out NAMI's information. We give out 988. And sometimes folks just don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And they'll call and say, I'm just looking for a therapist in Rock Hill. And I'll say, do you have insurance? Yeah, I have Blue Cross Blue Shield. Well, let's go to their website, and here are all your in-network therapists. And they're like, I didn't even think about that. So stuff like that is you don't know what you don't know. And so having informed people connecting is so very important, which brings me to this question. This is a big question. And I want to just, from your perspective, April, obviously your perspective, what legacy do you hope this book, your story, Cheslie's story, what legacy do you hope it leaves for the consumers of this book and other?
It sounds almost, I don't want to say trivial and commonplace, but I really hope that when people read this book or when they look into Cheslie's life, that they do realize that they're not alone. That feeling like no one is going to understand my struggle, nobody's going to understand what I'm going through, can be so isolating, and create those inner secrets. And now you're living this masked life, and that is not sustainable. And so honestly, my hope is that we do allow people to come out from those shadows and drop the mask. It is truly okay to not be okay, because there is help, support, and resources available to support you. I really hope that above all, that people begin to grasp that.
One last big question, a little short question for us, but potentially loaded question. Your chance to, I guess, encapsulate your overall message and really hammer home the things that are most important to you. So, April, for you, what is the stuff that matters?
I think the stuff that matters, and I'm going to say this for me personally, is living authentically, especially in front of my children. My children need to know what it looks like to struggle, and what it looks like to reach for support, and what it looks like to be a support. If we could all get that part down, I really think it helps to break the stigma, because ultimately that's what I want to see. I don't want to see people mumbling under their breath mental health, or I'm struggling with. I don't want to see that anymore. I want people to be able to say it with their full chest, 10 toes down. I'm not okay, and here's what I'm going to do, or here's what I need, or here's the support I'm looking for. This is the steps that I've taken. And it be okay to say that. And that happens when each of us individually starts to live authentically. When I take the mask off, Patrick, Mike, Matt, when we take that mask off and show people it's okay to have a tough day, it's okay to not have all the answers. That's okay. And here's what I'm going to do. Here's the steps I'm going to take. I want to see that happen. That's the stuff to me that really matters.
Well, I will say,
Yeah,
April. I mean, again, when I just want to thank you for, and this might seem trite or silly to say, but like I want to say thank you for finishing and fleshing out Cheslie's story, because obviously her story is remarkable. She lived a remarkable life. She seemed like an absolutely incredible person, but she was incredible not despite her struggles. She was incredible with all of those too, right? I mean, so like her story is not like, her story does include past attempts. Her story does include challenges in relation and success. And like we're all the sum of all of the stuff, right? And the beauty is in the cracks and the smudges and the wounds. Like all of that makes us kind of who we are, and we don't need to pretend for anybody. And so I think just thank you. I think it's just remarkable what you have done, and the level of kind of just strength and fortitude I could not imagine. But also just the honesty. The first few pages of your section of that book are for anybody who has grieved or has lost somebody. It's just so honest and so real. So I just think you've done this remarkably. I just want to say that truly. So
Thank you so much.
yeah. So thank you, April. Patrick, want to say where we can find April if folks want to lean into her mission and her story?
Yeah. And April, if you want to help me with this too, obviously the book can be found on Amazon, digital copy and obviously hard copy as well. On your podcast, where can people give that a listen?
Any place that they listen to podcasts while they doom scroll on their phones. So we're on Spotify, Apple, and all major outlets. It's called As I Was Saying, and it really talks about that marriage of mental health in the workplace.
Awesome. Well, April, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for all you're doing. Again, if folks want to lean in, you can reach out to April. She is findable. Lean into NAMI, lean into this mission. And again, her message of being authentic and being your true self, there's nothing better than that. So we'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you, April. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.